I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land across this great country and pay my respects to their history, their culture, and their precious ongoing contribution to our nation. It is also my great pleasure to welcome presidents of our affiliate organisations from across Australia, including our State Zionist Council presidents, Rodney Nomberger, Yossi Goldfarb, Jeff Lynn, Paul Gould, Robert Cussell, and Ehud Haben. Our partners at the United Israel Appeal, Karen Hayesod, Federal President Lance Rosenberg, and the soon-to-be incoming Federal President Esther Frankel, and I'll have a bit more to say about Lance later on. Mark Leibler, my father, but also chair of AJAC, and Gillian Siegel, president of the ECAJ. Thanks everyone for joining us. Allow me now just to say a few words for the president's address. And I'm conscious that last year at the biennial conference, I described the previous 2 years as a roller coaster ride. And it's almost cliche to say, sadly, on Zoom again, that it's been another crazy 12 months during which we have overcome significant challenges to deliver on our strategic objectives. But it's true. And we do have a full program tonight. So I'm not going to take up all of the time to spruik our achievements, our milestone achievements over the course of the year. All of these things are comprehensively covered in Jeanette's detailed CEO report, in the report that was circulated, and in the year in review video, and I urge you all to read it. Instead, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to focus on an issue which I see as one of the greatest challenges to the Australian Jewish community, and indeed probably the Jewish world. So much of what I've been reading of late bemoans the increasingly problematic relationship between American Jewry and Israel, a situation that an opinion piece in the New York Times recently referred to as the unraveling of American Zionism. Now, the article had me reflecting on a course that I did at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel and also in Poland when I was 21 years old. So about 21 years ago, just not to let any secrets away. And it was predominantly with a group of American college students. And of course, coincidentally, our very own Yair Miller, who's here tonight, happened to crash the course as well. But as it turned out for me, that trip was a real eye-opener. Like us all, I was a creature of my environment. I grew up in the fairly insular Jewish community of Melbourne, within the city's even somewhat more insular modern Orthodox community. Members of my family perished in the Holocaust. Some miraculously survived. Not an uncommon story in this community. Now, the American college students on the trip came from dramatically diverse Jewish backgrounds, some from the reform or conservative movements, which at the time, certainly the American students at the time, really didn't resemble much of what those movements were like in Australia at the time, quite different. But notwithstanding our, quite differences in our upbringing, it was very clear that as young Jewish people, what united us was greater than any of our divisions or our differences. And we formed meaningful friendships. And then something happened that really affected me. We were standing at Treblinka. Treblinka is an open area situated in a forest of pine trees that were planted after the Holocaust to hide the atrocities that took place there. And apart from the infamous train tracks and mass graves, there's nothing there that really remains of the camp itself. What one sees are thousands of different sized stones, each bearing the name of a Jewish community wiped out by the Nazis. And despite the magnitude of the moment, my reaction was almost clinical. And I remember that it troubled me at the time. Even as we started the tekes, which included various, tefillot and poetry, I felt numb. It was at the conclusion of the tekes that something stirred. And this might sound a little bit corny, but it's true. As we sort of stood on the ground where 1/3 of world Jewry were murdered, surrounded by monuments to long lost Jewish communities, we sung Hatikva, and something stirred in me. And it struck me as we sung Hatikva that the legacy of those lost Jewish communities would not simply be confined to a monument of stones at Treblinka, but with the living, breathing miracle that was and is the modern state of Israel. And later that night, get back to the hotel very late at night and we debrief. And one of the American college students told the group that she and other participants had felt that seeing Hatikva at Treblinka had been inappropriate because it politicized the Holocaust and it was a form of Aliyah bashing. And it sort of immediately dawned on me at that moment that the very same experience that had inspired me had had exactly the opposite effect on Laura, who's the American college student. One of the Israeli madrichim must have sort of seen the confusion on my face and looked at me and said, "Welcome to American Jewry." And so Laura wasn't an anti-Zionist. She had chosen to spend a year in Israel at the Hebrew University. Her relationship with Israel and the nature of her Jewish identity, though, was clearly very, very different to mine. And the Jewish diaspora has changed dramatically since that day at Treblinka 21 years ago. The disconnect with Israel that shocked me back then has sadly become completely unremarkable, which bothers me even more. Take the findings of a recent survey conducted by the Jewish Electorate Institute that showed 34% of respondents agreed that Israel's treatment of Palestinians is similar to racism in the United States. These are American Jews, not the general population. 25% agreed that Israel is an apartheid state, and 22% agreed that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians. Now, the survey was taken soon after the Abraham Accords were signed. And it was not lost on me, nor on many Israelis, that while American Jewish respondents were pointing the finger at Israel, not a single Arab country had recalled its ambassador in connection with Israel's response to the rocket attacks just now in Gaza. Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Bahrain, none of them. And so it begs the question, what does it mean for the Jewish people that Israel can now expect more support in its greatest time of need, in effect a time of war, from the Arab world than from the largest Jewish community outside of Israel? Now, of course, the survey is not necessarily representative of all American Jewry. There may be deficiencies in the survey itself, but the results cannot be ignored. And we need to ask ourselves, how did we get here? And what can we do about it? And so American columnist Caroline Glick recently suggested that Israelis shouldn't be concerned by the survey statistics because, in her view, in 1 or 2 generations, most of the respondents would have completely assimilated. US Jewry will be similar in number, but smaller in number, but consist of mainly Orthodox Jews or other similarly minded, committed Jews who are far more supportive of Israel. Other commentators, such as Peter Beinart, suggest that the troubling shift in sentiment is the direct result of successive right-wing Israeli governments. The US Jews, who are mostly progressive, cannot reconcile Israeli government policies with their own values. That if only Israel ended the occupation, everything would be okay, and Americans would fall back in love with Israel. Now, with respect to Caroline Glick and Peter Beinart, I strongly disagree. Laura's discomfort at singing Hatikva at Treblinka over 20 years ago had absolutely nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But nor, in my view, do the alarming survey results. And Caroline Glick's suggestion that we accept the disappearance of a substantial proportion of the Jewish people because we have drifted apart is, in my view, fundamentally inconsistent with Jewish values and the lessons that we've learned from Jewish history. And of course, the challenges that we face in Australia are very different to those faced by American Jewry. And I don't believe that we are simply 10 to 15 years away from experiencing that same fate. It's not that simple. But nor do I believe that our best defense is hasbara, or equipping our community with arguments for or against certain particular issues. Jewish identity is not partisan. It's not left and it's not right. The only antidote for what's happening to American Jewry and for ensuring that the same phenomena doesn't ever descend upon our community is education. We have to ensure that our community, not just our youth, but our entire community is Jewishly literate, that people are equipped with an intellectual as well as an emotional connection to Israel and Jewish history and Jewish values. The success of Masa and Birthright in instilling young Jewish Americans and Jewish Australians, of course, with a connection to Israel provides ample proof of this. And in this area of engagement, we have so much to be proud of here in Australia. Our reputation as a strong and proudly Zionist community is an achievement owned by everyone on this Zoom tonight, from our youth movements and orgists to all of our affiliates, to our partners at UAA and so many more who contribute to what we do. It is why we have chosen to invest heavily in our Israel programs, because the data tells us that this is the key to ensuring the next generation of Australian Jews are meaningfully engaged and connected with their Jewish identity and the state of Israel. It's why we've raised more than $1.7 million for Israel Go, to augment Birthright and to ensure that no one is precluded from visiting Israel for financial or other reasons. Now, I've said it before, but I need to say it again, that this idea and this initiative would never have seen the light of day without the support and vision of UAA and our other generous philanthropists. Specifically, I want to thank Lance Rosenberg, Stephen Lowy, and Yair Miller for their support for Israel Go and all of our activities. And as many of you know, Lance is about to finish his term as federal president of UAA. Lance is the definition of a mensch, and in my view reflects the gold standard of Jewish leadership, always putting the community first, always. And Lance, while we're saying a little bit of a goodbye, I have no doubt that you will continue to contribute to the Jewish community and Israel for many years to come. Let me finish just by saying how incredibly proud I am of our professional staff, who, under the cool, calm, and eminently capable leadership of Jeanette Searle, and with the support from our lay leadership, have continued to navigate multiple, not just pandemic-induced challenges, but lots of other challenges too, to deliver a superb program and to deliver on our strategic objectives. The team has not missed a beat, and I urge you all to read Jeanette's report. At the end of the day, of course, the strength of the Australian Zionist movement has always been founded on the active grassroots involvement of our affiliates. And this last year has been no different. And I feel confident that as we approach 2022, we are in a strong position to seize on a whole new set of opportunities for the benefit of our community and the state of Israel. So thank you all for your support over this period of time. And we look forward to moving forward together.